Businesses around the world are being directly impacted by the deadly coronavirus, which has now claimed close to 2,000 lives around the world. Joining me now to talk about it is our foreign affairs expert, Lisa Daftari. Lisa, the disease is even affecting Apple. The tech company is warning that there may be production delays.
Yes, production delays. And as my husband said last night, Apple is the market. So if Apple is worried about its production, its output, its numbers at the end of the day, then this obviously has a bearing on the rest of the market. And when this news was announced yesterday after the markets closed, I think those who are watching the markets knew that this morning there was going to be a huge correction that would better reflect the fact that coronavirus is affecting production, what's coming out of China, which is almost everything. And again, if Apple is the one who's calling the shots here and is kind of preemptively saying that there will be, there will be an effect on their numbers, so then that's going to trickle down into smaller businesses and, of course, people who are wondering how this news will affect the rest of the global economy, especially in terms of imports and exports. The people who I talk to in China on the ground, or people who travel back and forth, say that after the Chinese New Year, they haven't been able to go back to work yet. And of course, that's going to affect, production and output and exports. And already we know that there was, a tremendous strain on their markets because of the tariffs, because of this ongoing war of words. And delay in negotiations between the Chinese government and the U.S. And of course, coronavirus throwing a bigger wrench in this entire equation, leaving many to wonder how much information we're actually getting from the Chinese government, if that information is in fact correct, and how much of this is manipulated by them in order to correct or at least stick it to the rest of the world, particularly the United States and their control of the economy.
A prominent Chinese legal academic is urging Chinese President Xi Jinping to step down over China's major crises, including the coronavirus epidemic.
Yes, so the handling of course, the economy, again, under the tariffs, for this president to kind of put his own ego before the Chinese people has gotten many people worried about the future of that nation, as well as his dealings with neighboring countries like Hong Kong, like Taiwan and Japan, the Koreas. I think that it is a while now before that the Chinese people are just disillusioned with the way things are going. And now with the coronavirus, this is their health, this is their children's health, this is, of course, the well-being of the entire nation. Chinese people not being able to, again, go to work, go to school, travel, of course. The travel bans are very serious against the Chinese leaving certain parts of the country, and, of course, being quarantined in places where people are affected with this virus. These are huge numbers. And, again, who knows if we're actually getting the numbers that are accurate and portray the reality of what's going on. This is, there should be more of a press against the Chinese government for answers. And if it's no surprise that people are asking him to step down.
Here in Canada, a lot of the Chinatowns, the Asian communities are really being impacted by the coronavirus. People are staying away. Businesses are hurting. Same thing in Los Angeles?
Before this coronavirus, what we had, the issue here in Los Angeles, was people not vaccinating their children, or people traveling to Los Angeles without vaccinations and having measles. So you'd see, and even this week, a very popular mall in my area, there was a sign at the Nordstrom's that said somebody who had the measles visited here. So people are very weary about, following these warnings and not going in places where people may be affected with these viruses. So again, with the coronavirus, people are on guard, and they know that people travel, and they know that there was a shortage of masks. A friend of ours owns a pharmacy, and he was on the local news talking about how there's a shortage of masks, and people think that when they go into these areas, or areas where these people are employed, or they frequent, or they own businesses, as you mentioned, that they should wear these masks and be as safe as possible. Again, this is an airborne virus that it's as easy as catching a cold, and it can cost you your life. So, the people are following the precautions, and there's nothing that's, too safe in keeping people's families safe from this virus.
Yeah, it's very serious. Now, still with China, there are reports that China is targeting Muslims, in particular Muslims who grow beards. What is that all about?
This is a story that's been going on for a very long time. It's the isolation of Muslims in China and putting them in camps. This has been compared to concentration camps. It's been compared to a lot of horrific things in history. Yet it's not being covered to the extent that it should be covered. Who's ever even heard of Muslims living in China, right? And now, when this news comes out, this latest report indicates that they are isolating not only the Muslim community, but anyone who may be affiliated with them. So if they have family members who are practicing, non-practicing, if they appear to have, beards or are following in the Muslim faith, they are being rounded up. They are being separated from their families, from their communities, and put into these camps. This is the year 2020, and to be talking about a story like this again, the Chinese government with its bad behavior, with its a lack of adherence to human rights. We see again stories, headlines all month long about the crackdown against journalists, against certain media channels that don't report so flatteringly on the government, that are more critical, that are more skeptical, that are doing investigative reports. So this is more of the same from the Chinese government. And when you have Donald Trump, President of the United States, standing up to the Chinese government, it's met with a lot of criticism. But this was a long time coming for the Chinese government. And again, you have opposition groups in China, in Hong Kong, of course, that have been crying about this for a very long time. And now, these stories, little or much more significant, are coming to light about the true behaviors of the Chinese government.
Lisa, ImageSat International reported this week that heavy damage was inflicted upon the Islamic Revolutionary Guard sites in Damascus. The airstrikes appear to have hit warehouses, a shelter headquarters, and other infrastructure.
Yes, I actually tweeted about this news and made a little bit of a joke about it, that you'd think that the Revolutionary Guard, that the Iranian regime would learn its lesson from hanging out around airports. We had the killing of Qasem Soleimani last month at the Baghdad airport, and here we have the taking out of their apparatuses near the Damascus airport. It makes perfect sense that they've set up around these airports for easy access in and out to get their supplies, etc. But the good news here is that whoever caused this strike, whether it was the United States or Israel, but fingers are pointing at Israel, the intel is there about where the Iranian regime has set up its assets in the region. And if you look at Iraq or Syria, and the two places where the Iranian regime is most fixated and the world community is most fixated on, is because they have taken over these two countries with their influence, and that's exactly their goal. And if you look at the way that they've set up their apparatuses, where the native governments and the native people rely on them and their intel and their weapons and their fighters in order to stay in power, and that's exactly their goal. They want to be part of the next chapter of these countries' narrative. And when we talk about the stability and the future of the Middle East, it's impossible to talk about that without the extraction of the Revolutionary Guard, which is the paramilitary arm of the Iranian regime, and the damage that they're doing, supporting terrorism, whether it's Hezbollah in Lebanon or the Basij in Syria and Iraq, or bringing even Hezbollah forces to South America and infiltrating these places. They're in Africa, they're all over the Middle East, they're in North Africa, throughout the continent, and of course, again, in South America, right at the footstep of the United States. So this is serious business, but again, the good news being that their assets are recognized. They have, there's serious intel on where they're setting up, how they're growing, and they're being taken out. And that's good news. It's good news when you hear Iranians at home in Tehran and all over the country protesting in favor of the United States, very, very contrary to what the government posts with their videos of death to America and death to Israel. Those are more contrived protests with, protesters being taken there against their own volition, or when it becomes mandatory from school or work at the university, etc., to attend these protests against the United States and in favor of the government. We also see the other side, and that is in fact what the social media revolution has done for them, to tell their story, to tell it accurately, and for the world community to understand that their government is against them. And now with this support in the region to take out these assets and to stunt the growth of the Iranian regime is one step closer to defeating this government.
The United Nations says nearly 875,000 people have been displaced by the Russian-backed Syrian offensive, Lisa. Trump and Turkey are calling for Russia to stop and hold off on the Syrian atrocities.
Yeah, this is a sad situation because, this was entirely preventable. And I say preventable because from the first day that the Syrian civil war started, the United States drew a red line. President Obama's government drew a red line and said, we will get involved if there are chemical weapons. And guess what? When there were chemical weapons, there was nothing done about it except for, and if people remember this, the Russians were allowed to come in and take care of it. And by taking care of it, what did they do? They embedded themselves in the situation and they made it worse. And now we have all these different layers, and the Syrian crisis has only gotten worse. And when you say that number, almost 1 million people displaced just because of the Russian offensive, think about the other about 2 million or more people were already displaced because of the turmoil in that country from day one. Now, there are so many different layers. It's the Iranian regime that's there with their own agenda. You have the Russians there with their own agenda. You have the Turks there with their own agenda, namely to get rid of the Kurdish population there. And again, from day one, when we got involved in 2010, we didn't know what our agenda was. And when I say we, it's the West, the allies. We didn't know what our agenda was in Syria, what outcome would be most favorable to the West, and if we would want to even steer a specific outcome. Would we want a seat at that table to see that outcome? Would we want Bashar al-Assad in power? Would we want him out of power? Which one would be better for the stability and the safety and security of the region and the assets in the Middle East? So I think this was a long time coming. We've been involved in Syria for over a decade, and nothing has really changed. These different groups that I speak of, these different nations, these different factions that have gotten involved have only become more deeply intertwined with their own agendas. And who's paying for that? It's the Syrian people, unfortunately.
Lisa, here's an interesting story. North Korea's Kim Jong-un spent over $500,000 US on Russian horses over the past decade. I guess every man needs a hobby.
Yes, and we know that this man has a very, very strange and peculiar hobbies and fetishes and likes and dislikes. We've heard about how he travels with his own toilets, with his own snacks. He's a junk food lover, and of course, he has a horse fetish. He imports these purebred horses from Russia. It's a lot of horses for $500,000, but then again, horses are expensive. So, this is his fetish. And if you remember this photo op that you see him on this white regal horse, it looks like it's out of a cartoon. That's him. He wants to show that he has power, that he has wealth, that he is this leader, this emperor, and that's exactly what he does. He creates these photo ops, he has these extremely weird interests, and he flaunts them to the world. And the lucky Russian horse breeders who get this cut of the business from him.
Has Trump challenged him to a horse race at all? I'm guessing Trump has a few horses as well, right?
That would be interesting. Who knows what goes on? As you know, they're pen pals, so perhaps this was mentioned in one of the letters that they've exchanged.
Our foreign affairs expert, Lisa Daftari, joining me once again from Los Angeles. Thanks again, Lisa.
My pleasure.
On behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News, I'm Hal Roberts. God bless, and thanks so much for watching.